So I think the general consensus from most gamers online nowadays is yes, indeed, we are nearing the end of the Nintendo Switch's life cycle, and it seems like each Nintendo Direct presentation we get, it really points us more in that direction of, yes, Nintendo is gearing up with their big devs and big teams on what is coming for next gen, not this gen. That is the reason we are seeing so many of the ports and remaster treatments for classic fan-beloved games to pad out Nintendo's release schedule while they transition to next-generation hardware. This is not only historically what they did during the end of the 3DS generation, but also something that was claimed from all of the various insiders within the gaming industry, stating that Nintendo would very likely be focusing heavily on ports and remasters when they were ramping things up for the next generation. You then pair that with all of the reports that we've gotten recently from credible names like Andy Robinson at VGC, Tom Phillips at Eurogamer, amongst many others, saying that Nintendo was at Gamescom 2023 with Nintendo Switch 2, or whatever it's going to be called, dev kits, that they were showing off the technology such as DLSS, and we're running some very impressive tech demos with things like Breath of the Wild in 4K 60 FPS with no load times being claimed, in addition to that Matrix tech demo that we saw showcased on the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. And by all accounts, from people who have seen this firsthand, the claim is that Nintendo actually has something that is very comparable in terms of visual quality to things like a PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X or S. I'm picturing this console to be more in line with the power of the Series S, but when we are talking about power like that, you have to realize that games are being developed alongside of the Xbox Series X for the Series S with content parity in most cases. Meaning a lot of the third-party games that are big hits right now could potentially make it over to Nintendo's next-gen console, and we could be talking about some very taxing games that just quite honestly are not capable of running on a base model Nintendo Switch. And the game in question today is one that you may be familiar with online because it absolutely blew up. It's actually one of the games that sits alongside of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom with the highest Metacritic review score of the year so far, and that is none other than Baldur's Gate 3. I've looked into this game. I have not played it myself yet. I'm not familiar with the world of Dungeons and Dragons, but I understand that it ties into that from a story perspective very heavily. However, I am very intrigued by the combat mechanics, and whenever you look at this game at first glance, you may not think it's the most graphically intensive thing, but while there has been a PlayStation 5 version now released, there's actually some complications in the Xbox Series S version, just getting it to run split-screen co-op, which is a feature that this game does indeed support, and the Xbox version is being held back until that can be solved for. And the reason we are to believe that this game may indeed be headed to the next generation Nintendo console has to do with a Nintendo employee being credited within the credits of this game, and this person's job specifically revolving around getting third-party projects brought over to the Switch. As you can see the following post over on the R Gaming Leaks and Rumors Reddit, where it reads, "Longtime Nintendo employee mysteriously credited under special thanks for Baldur's Gate 3. His credited games also include many third-party Nintendo games such as Disney Illusion Island, Shin Megami Tensei 5, and Dragon Quest VIII 3DS remake. Maybe Baldur's Gate 3 is in the works for Switch 2. Now, there was some back and forth in the post here beneath where you can see some people initially jumping to the conclusion that it was a 2020 credit, but it has since been verified that he was added to this in 2023. So it's not years old. This is a recent finding, and there's really not another good explanation for why this Nintendo employee's name would be featured in the credits if it was not tied to this game potentially being in the works or a next generation Switch console. While this is no means confirmation that the game will for sure be headed to the next gen Switch, I do think that it makes a lot of sense to see something that is a smash hit success that is blowing up online on PC communities and PS5, and no doubt Xbox will follow once it gets its release and bring that to a Nintendo console that will have an immediate large install base with people who are ready to upgrade from their current Switch that they have today at over 129 million strong install base that we have right now on the base model Switch. And this could be one of those games that would make a lot of sense to potentially line up for the launch window of the Switch 2 or whatever Nintendo calls it, because this game is finished and ready to go. And if there is a port being worked on in the background right now, this is that type of technical showpiece that Nintendo could definitely put forward in even their marketing trailers for this console, showing the power and capability that yes, Nintendo Switch 2 is a true next-gen console, because what you also have to keep in mind about Baldur's Gate 3 is that there is not a PlayStation 4 or Xbox One version of this title because of its complexity in terms of getting it to run effectively on older hardware. So the rumors about Nintendo having something comparable to PS4 Pro may still be true, but I think with the kind of shortcuts that they've used with things like DLSS and the hand-by-hand custom chipset that they've been working on with Nvidia for this thing will likely give them resources to compete alongside of the power of these larger dedicated home consoles, just with using some AI tricks to get it done in the background without having to have the raw horsepower that is required to run a lot of this stuff, or render a lot of it rather natively. I also think that seeing reports of a game like Baldur's Gate 3 when it's a next-gen exclusive being talked about potentially for the Switch 2 really paints a good picture for the other missing games that are out there today that we would love to see come over to the next generation console. I think games like Elden Ring could very well be on the table. I'm sure From Software and Bandai Namco would love to have a piece of the Nintendo user base by porting that game over, and we're mysteriously still missing things like Dark Souls 2 and 3 on the Switch, which I do think could run okay. I'm a huge Souls fan, and Dark Souls Remastered, while it looks good on the Switch, it definitely has a visual downgrade and it runs at 30 FPS as opposed to 60. I would love to see Dark Souls, the rest of the entire franchise, brought over on more capable, next generation powerful hardware, and so maybe we just don't see anything in that Souls universe released until Nintendo does unveil their next gen hardware. I don't necessarily think we'll ever see games like Kingdom Hearts go back and get reworked versions for the next gen console, but that's another perfect example of games that could have been ported over natively, but Square Enix felt like the work that was required to get probably Kingdom Hearts 3 being the only real hiccup to run effectively on the Switch console we have today wasn't worth the return on investment, and they chose to port the entire series as cloud ports, which really just defeats the entire purpose of having Kingdom Hearts on Nintendo Switch, in my opinion. So I'm hopeful maybe we get those kind of titles talked about as well. Star Wars Outlaws is a game that's coming up for current gen consoles that I would love to have Nintendo in the conversation for. It might be in the conversation if we're talking about a console with the kind of power that we've seen claimed from the dev kits. And I think that this Baldur's Gate rumor / leak, reveal, whatever you want to call it, definitely adds fuel to the fire that the next gen Nintendo Switch console could indeed be a third-party powerhouse when it comes to not being left out of the conversation anymore. Outside of the Sony and Microsoft exclusives, of course, I don't think we'll see those make it over, but any of the big third-party games that people get pumped about that they want to have day one, they may now have a third option to pick it up on a hybrid console so you can play it at home or on the go, and that is a very exciting prospect to me. But I really want to hear from you guys at this point in the video, your personal thoughts and opinions on this Baldur's Gate 3 information. Do you think that yes, indeed, there is a version of this game planned for Nintendo Switch 2 or next-gen Switch, and you think that this is indeed indicative of revealing that? Because again, this is a Nintendo employee, there's no reason for his name to be in the credits other than potentially securing a deal for the game to get a port to the next gen hardware. Or do you think this is one of those situations where maybe there's another explanation for the reason he's being credited in the game and it's not really an indication of it? And what do you personally hope we see in terms of third-party support for a next-gen Nintendo console? Do you think it ramps up and we do indeed see a lot of these games that are missing from the base model Switch today brought over? Or do you think that maybe even with more capable hardware, we still don't see the same kind of third-party love and support that you do on the other consoles like Xbox and PlayStation? But regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before we leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch yesterday's video next if you haven't already, which is on screen right now. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.